G'day beautiful people, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at my rework idea for Mr. Riktor. Before we get into the video, I'd like to say that when I do these rework videos, I do look at the character's history. I also look at other community members' suggestions. In some cases, like today, I will be agreeing with those community members and going along with their ideas with perhaps some minor tweaks like today. And in some cases, I won't. Whether I do or don't, I may provide feedback on those ideas. As far as my videos go, my intention is to be as inventive and out there as possible. But in a lot of instances, like today, I'll be keeping the kits pretty much the same, just making some tweaks. Now we know that passives are going to exist. Well, I think they are. So I'm going to suggest a passive for every hero. I'm also going to suggest quests. Because I love the idea of quests. So quests are an objective that is given to an ability, like hitting X amount of heroes with that ability, and you get a buff on its completion. Now, I'm going to be giving a quest to their passive and their 3 basic abilities. Whether it ends up being a circumstance where, all 4 of those quests become a thing and are available during a match, or my suggestion of every hero having a passive quest every match and choosing one of the other 3 abilities to go for a quest on. Or, it just ends up with a situation where every hero has a random quest, so Sparrow has a quest on her passive, or, Riktor has a quest on his Lash. Doesn't matter whichever way it goes. I figure the best way to do it is to actually provide 4 quests. That way there's just more ideas on the table as to how to build those characters. I also like to point out that I do like the system that I want, which is that everyone gets the passive quest and everyone gets to choose one basic ability to get a quest for, because it just provides you with an extra way to tailor your build or to counter the enemy team, perhaps. But with that said, let's get started. Now, Riktor is a great hero in the right hands. He can be extremely strong. I've witnessed quite a few very good Riktors in my time. I'm sure some of you will remember just how powerful he was at the end of Legacy during the armor meta. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that believe that Riktor is a support, but personally, I think he's a tank that can play support. I've witnessed a lot of people get very mouthy at players choosing Riktor in the jungle, only to be silenced when those good Riktor players carry a game from the jungle. So we're going to be considering him as a tank, so that he can jungle, but that won't stop him from being able to support. So I suggest he has a 1-to-1 armor scaling, like all tanks. And when it comes to his basic attack, his power scaling should be around 0.5. And Riktor's basic attack also has a 20% cleave. Now moving on to his passive, I actually really like Sylphan's idea for his passive, so I've given it a dodgy name, which is Riot Gear, because it kind of makes sense, because he's a warden. But yeah, anyway, when Riktor has an enemy hero under the effect of his abilities, his armor is increased by 20% for 4 seconds. I think this is a great passive, in my opinion. It rewards him for simply doing his job. So I've gone along with Sylphan's idea, which made my job easy today. Now my suggestion for his passive quest would be after crowd controlling, after affecting, that was originally what my idea was, after affecting 30 enemy heroes with his abilities, bonus armor is increased to 30%. The wording is important. We'll get onto that in a minute. Nothing too strong, but keep in mind that this is more about the idea. Perhaps it might need to be stronger, weaker, whatever. So for his first ability, which is his bread and butter, and that is Lash, I'm not suggesting any changes, really, to how the ability works, but perhaps the mana cost needs to be looked at. I get that being able to pull a target is very strong, but it is a skill shot, so the ridiculously high mana cost that we had at the end of Monolith needs to be changed, in my opinion. I have adjusted it in the overlay, but perhaps it's still too high. Now for the quest, once again, I really like Sylphan's idea, but I only like half of it. So Sylphan suggested that enemies at the target location, as in the enemies standing near the enemy hero that is being pulled, should get slowed and silenced. So Let's say, for example, Riktor is pulling a Sparrow. Sparrow is standing next to Grux and Phase. He's suggesting that Grux and Phase should be slowed and silenced. Personally, I don't like the silence. So I just went with, after pulling 15 enemy heroes, enemies around Riktor's target are slowed by 30%. Now, the reason I don't like the silence is that I think that it makes sense that Phase should hard counter Riktor's pull. So silencing her doesn't seem right to me. I think that it's great that he has a skill shot, and he's able to pull people out of position, but Phase's job should always be to, no matter what happens, pull people back into position. So I don't agree with the silence. I'm not saying it's not a stupid idea. I just don't think it should be a thing for that very reason. So moving on to his second ability, Shock Therapy. I'm suggesting that Shock Therapy stays relatively unchanged. I just feel like if it's going to have a quest, that the buff should be a duration increase. So I've chosen to reduce the base duration to 2 seconds instead of 2.5. And the quest would read, after affecting 20 enemy heroes with Shock Therapy, silence and slow duration is increased to 3 seconds. It is strong. 3 seconds is a lot, but it's only 20% stronger than what his original Shock Therapy was. So I think that's fair. The ability will now be 20% weaker than what it used to be, and it will become 20% stronger than what it used to be via the buff. So next up we have Electrocute. Personally, I think this ability is great, but rather than the ability just dealing damage, because the way that it used to work is that it deals damage every second for the 5 seconds that it's active, I would rather that it applies a dot to enemies that are in the radius. Now, whether that, you need to think about whether applying the dot to a player means that it can never be applied again. If they walk back in and be reset, however it works, I do not know. But I'd prefer it to be a dot, because then it will proc his passive, because just dealing damage doesn't sort of really work. Whereas if you're applying a damage over time to someone, that is an effect that you're applying to someone, so it will proc his armor. That way, all of his abilities, his 3 abilities and his ultimate, will proc his passive. I feel like the options for the quest are to either buff the damage, the duration, or the radius. So I went with, after damaging 30 enemy heroes with Electrocute, radius is increased to 650 units. This will give him a pretty big radius on this. It'll ensure that he's able to proc his passive easily. He'll be able to apply his dot damage more effectively, which means he procs his passive easier. And that's that for Electrocute. Finally, we have his ultimate, Skewer, which, let's be honest, is great. Needs no changes in my opinion. I've always been a fan of the ability, but if changes were needed, perhaps the wedge could be made slightly wider or the range could be made slightly longer. I don't really think that any of that is necessary though. So that's Riktor, a crowd control tank that can proc bonus armor so long as he continues to land his abilities. All of his abilities will proc that armor buff. Has the armor scaling of a tank, with all of his abilities using ability damage, so you don't end up with a tanky powerhouse that has high basic attack damage and ability damage. And I'm not sure if I actually set it during his basic attack, but being a tank, he would have 0.5 basic attack scaling. So he gets a lot out of his armor. He gets not much out of any basic damage that he puts on his build. He will get stuff out of ability damage if he puts it on his build, but I think it's really bad when, especially when we have the standard power put onto your build with a 1-to-1 power scaling. You ended up with a pretty tanky hero that had decent basic attack damage and decent ability damage, which just doesn't make sense for a tank. It's so silly. But I'm interested to hear your opinions on these ideas, so drop me a comment down below. If you enjoyed the video, smash the like button. If you're not already subscribed, consider doing that. With that said, thank you so much for watching. I love your face, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.